late that night, 70 state police and about 200 of Sheriff Don Chafin's deputies raided a coal camp at Sharpless on the Union side of Blair Mountain. They were surprised to find armed marchers still there, and a fierce gunfight broke out. Before the police and deputies retreated back into Logan County, they had killed and wounded several miners. Reports of the raid spread rapidly among the miners. By the following morning, they were back on the march. Logan prepared for invasion. Only 2 railway lines went into Logan County, and Don Chafin's guards controlled them. There were no roads. There was no direct way in except for 3 steep trails that went over Blair Mountain. Chafin and the miners knew that this was where they'd have to face each other. Chafin lined the crest of the mountain with 3,000 deputy sheriffs, Baldwin Felt's guards, and West Virginia State Police, armed with machine guns, submachine guns, and tear gas bombs. By August 28, the first wave of miners reached the foot of Blair Mountain.
When they hit Blair Mountain, they didn't just charge the mountain. They waited till everybody got there. Then bugle calls were given for certain squadrons to move at certain times. Previous to this, scouts had been sent out to cut down the telegraph and telephone wires. The local at Blair Mountain had dug trenches and provided other forms of shelter for the miners who were marching from Charleston once they got there. It was a highly organized, disciplined affair.
The shooting started on Tuesday morning, August 30th. An advance patrol of miners encountered a small outpost of Logan deputies. Several were killed in the skirmish and many others taken prisoner. Correspondents at the scene rushed the news to their papers. The Charleston Gazette, the New York Times, and the Washington Star blazed with sensational headlines. The nation was finally awakened to the events at Blair. Throughout the night and following day, fighting was heavy along several fronts. The sound of machine guns and sniper fire pierced the mountain air.
Talking about shooting, you couldn't hear your ears for the bullets. Couldn't hear nothing else when we were shooting. It was just like a bumblebees or honeybees are flying in there. And that's about how it went.
We stayed pretty close during all that time. You never knew when the shooting was going to start or stop. And everybody that had a basement, certainly they got a lot of use during this time.
They had about 2,000 or 3,000 men on top of the hill entrenched in with machine guns all along the top of the hill. And that my cousin had told me that they wasn't going to let anybody pass. They're going to kill every fellow that attempted to cross that mountain.
Private planes, paid for by the coal operators, were also used in the warfare.
The private planes were hired to drop bombs on our marchers. One was a non-explosive, nauseating type. The other was a high explosive.
Reports of the battle at Blair Mountain poured into Charleston. Governor Morgan again appealed to President Harding for military aid. He was convinced that nothing except the show of federal troops could stop the miners now. President Harding responded with a public proclamation. He put 2 United States Army regiments on alert and sent General Bandholtz back to the battlefront. He then threatened to place the entire state of West Virginia under martial law unless the miners called off their attack by noon the next day. Ignoring the president's warning, the miners continued their assault. This time, they were going all the way.
By Thursday, September 1st, the miners believed that they could indeed go all the way. They had 10,000 men, 3 times the number that Chafin had on his defensive line, and they thought they could storm up Blair Mountain, through Logan, perhaps all the way to Mingo County. They were in control of some 500 square miles of southern West Virginia. They operated the trains. They controlled the school buildings. They confiscated automobiles. They were in command. They were not about to turn back as they'd done before. They were willing to put the test to President Harding's ultimatum.
That evening, from his field headquarters in Charleston, General Bandholtz wired Washington, requesting the immediate mobilization of United States troops. Within hours, Army battalions from Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana, and New Jersey were deployed to the Charleston area. On Saturday morning, September 3rd, 2,500 soldiers converged onto Blair Mountain. Half of the force moved in from behind the miners. The other half came in from the Logan side, behind the defenders.
Big Lewis White was a Union leader. He came and got up on a big wooden coal house we had and said, go in the mountains and tell the miners to ground arms and come out. That United States soldiers are coming up Coal River and Guyan River, and they'll do the right thing about it.
Both sides were ordered to cease fire, and both sides readily complied. The nation's largest armed insurrection since the Civil War was over.
It's hard to comprehend, of course, why with so much hatred on both sides the surrender occurred so easily. My explanation, at least one explanation, is that the arrival of the federal troops meant to West Virginia's miners that at long last they had gotten the attention of the country. Newsreels were sending in their first cameramen to record the event. Photographers were there, and for weeks thereafter, magazines and other newspapers investigated the plight of the West Virginia miner. After the surrender, the miners were taken in a train of trolley cars that were hitched together down Coal River, across the Kanawha River, into Charleston, right down the main street of Charleston. The townspeople turned out to see them as they came through. The miners were leaning out of the windows of the streetcars, yelling and cheering, and the people along the street, too, were cheering. And the miners, some of them were waving American flags out of the windows. And they were yelling things like, "It was Uncle Sam did it." That was their victory. They had forced Uncle Sam, they had forced their country to come to their rescue, to come to their help.
While the Battle of Blair Mountain closed one turbulent chapter in West Virginia history, it was not the end of the coal miners' struggle. The following year, Frank Keeney and Bill Blizzard, along with over 500 other Union leaders and sympathizers, were indicted on charges of treason against the state for their role in the armed march. While most were acquitted or given light sentences, the court costs broke the district locals, forcing them to turn over control to the international organization. Between 1920 and 25, more than 50,000 men, women, and children were locked out of their jobs and evicted from company-owned houses and lands. Broken and disillusioned, their great moment of solidarity behind them, many miners went back to work in non-union mines. Only slowly did sympathy shift. It would be a decade before the miners in the union would see the fruits of their local struggle. Public opinion was changing, and the Roosevelt administration backed the rights of labor to organize. After more than 30 years, the Union had come to West Virginia. Blair Mountain is quiet today. What happened here in 1921 needs to be remembered, for it was a turning point for America. It was one of those rare moments when history itself seemed to hold its breath. Those at the top of the mountain were not just defending Logan and Mingo counties. They were defending the 19th century belief that those with wealth and power had a right to the destiny of those who toiled. Those who marched to the mountain were bringing with them the new century's conviction that there were limits to what humans could do to one another for the sake of profit and power.